Okay, so you ready to jump into another deep dive?
Always up for a good deep dive, you know that. What are we tackling today?
Well, today, we're wading into the world of relationship expectations.
Oh, that's a big one. Where are we even starting with that?
Well, you've given us quite the interesting pairing this time.
Oh.
Yeah, we've got this YouTube video, and let's just say there's this guy who does not hold back on his opinions about value in relationships.
Oh, boy.
And to make things even more interesting, we're pairing that with a course outline that's all about, women taking charge.
Yeah.
Like flipping the script.
Wow. Okay, right off the bat, that contrast is just fascinating. I mean, on the one hand, you have what feels like a direct message, from one gender to the other. And then on the other hand, you have something that's all about personal empowerment within a relationship. Wild. It just goes to show you how differently these conversations can go, even when we're talking about the same basic thing.
It's true. It's like they're speaking two completely different languages, even though they're both supposed to be about relationships.
Exactly.
So about this YouTube video, this guy, he's totally convinced that, women just aren't valued the way they used to be.
Okay.
And you know why, according to him? Because they're not sticking to those traditional roles anymore. The whole, being a homemaker, being the more submissive partner.
Right.
And he's saying now it's all about, appearances, materialism, that kind of thing.
And he's directly saying that this shift is why men aren't valuing women the same way, which is, well, it's quite a bold statement to make, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
It really makes you wonder. I mean, are we really seeing a change in how men value women? Or could this just be a case of, everyone's expectations are changing and nobody's really talking about it directly, so it comes out in these other ways?
Right.
It's tricky because with this video, we're only getting one side of a very complicated story.
Totally. And you want to know what else? It gets even more interesting.
Oh, how so?
Well, he starts getting into specifics. And let me tell you, some of this stuff is going to raise some eyebrows. He starts going on about how physical intimacy is being used as a weapon.
Whoa. Okay.
Yeah, and then he gets into how important cleanliness is. And he even throws in some things about women having, and I quote, masculine energy.
See, that's where we have to be really careful. I get it, he's expressing his perspective, but painting entire genders with such a broad brush, that can get really dicey.
Yeah.
It's important to remember that just because someone says something doesn't make it true for everyone. I think a better way to approach this would be to ask ourselves, are these so-called traditional values inherently negative? Or are we maybe missing a bigger conversation here about mutual respect, communication, finding a balance that works for both people?
It's like he has this very specific vision of what a relationship should look like, and you kind of have to wonder, is that even something anyone else wants?
Right. It might be his preference, but it's definitely not a universal truth.
And something you said earlier really got me thinking. We're completely missing the other half of the equation here.
We are.
What about what women want in relationships? And what about their expectations of men? What are they looking for?
Right.
I mean, are they feeling undervalued too, but just not saying it the same way?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's exactly why it's so important to look at all sides of this issue. If we only ever focus on one perspective, well, we miss out on all the nuances, We miss the chance to see the full picture.
It's true.
And speaking of different perspectives, should we move on to that course outline? Because that one's like the complete opposite.
Talk about a 180. It really is. This one's all about women taking the reins and, as they put it, giving him something to value.
It is interesting, though, isn't it, how both of these sources, even though they're coming at it from totally different angles, they both seem to think that the key to a successful relationship is changing your behavior. It's all about doing the right things.
It's like they're reading from the same playbook, but they're on opposite teams.
Yeah.
So this course, it wants to teach women how to, in their words, please their man. But, and here's the interesting part, they really emphasize that this all starts with self-love.
Interesting. So it's like they're acknowledging that you can't really make someone else happy if you're not happy with yourself first.
Exactly.
That's actually a pretty smart strategy. Like that saying, you can't pour from an empty cup. They're basically saying, look, you have to understand your own needs and what you bring to the table first.
Yeah. And get this, they even bring in all these modern references. They're talking about social media trends and stuff to make their points.
Really?
Yeah. So it definitely feels a lot more current, a lot more like it's speaking to the dating world as it is now.
Right.
Which is so different from that whole traditional vibe of that YouTube video.
It makes you wonder, Are either one of these approaches actually better than the other? Or does it all just come down to what you want in your own relationships? Like, what are you personally looking for?
That's the big question, right? Are we trying to fit into some kind of predetermined box of what a relationship should look like? Or are we trying to figure out what genuinely works for us, even if it looks a little different?
And then what happens if, you and your partner have totally different ideas about what that even means? How do you navigate those differences without resorting to these checklists and generalizations?
Right. Because those never tell the whole story.
Exactly.
It's true, though, isn't it? We can get so caught up in these, overly simple ideas about how relationships should be.
Oh, absolutely. Relationships are messy. They're complicated. It's not like you can just follow a set of rules and everything magically works out perfectly.
Exactly. There's no one-size-fits-all solution, that's for sure.
And that's actually where I think both of these sources, even though they seem so different on the surface, they both kind of stumble onto something really important.
Okay. Now you've got me intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, think about it this way. They're both, in their own way, emphasizing the importance of self-awareness.
Self-awareness.
Yeah, like the guy in the YouTube video, he's basically saying, look, this is what I value in a partner. This is what's important to me.
Yeah.
And whether you agree with what he's saying or not, at least he's put it out there.
Okay.
And then you've got the course outline, right? And it's coming from this whole other angle, but it's also telling women, hey, know your own worth. Understand what you bring to the table and go from there.
Right.
So it's like, regardless of whose perspective resonates more with you, that underlying idea of knowing yourself, that's crucial.
Oh, wow. I never even thought of it like that before.
Yeah.
But you're so right. If you don't even know what you want in a relationship, how can you ever hope to find it with somebody else?
Exactly. It'd be like, trying to go on a road trip without deciding on a destination first. Like, you might end up somewhere, sure, but will it be somewhere you actually want to be?
And can you imagine how much harder it would be to deal with all those unexpected detours and wrong turns if you and the person you're with haven't even agreed on where you're going in the first place?
I mean, talk about a recipe for disaster, right?
Right.
But when both people have taken the time to figure out what's important to them, what their values are, what their expectations are, well, suddenly those bumps in the road don't seem quite as jarring.
It's like that saying, communication is key.
Right. It really is. And it's not just about communicating with your partner, although that's obviously huge. It's also about being honest with yourself about what you want and need from a relationship.
Oh, that's such a good point. And being open to the fact that what you want and need might change over time, too.
Exactly. Because what works for you at one point in your life might not work 5 years down the road. And that's okay.
Totally. It's like relationships aren't static. People change. Circumstances change. You have to be willing to adapt and adjust as you go.
You've got to be willing to have those sometimes difficult conversations, the ones about expectations and boundaries and all that.
And to be open to hearing what your partner has to say, too, even if it's not what you want to hear. Thinking about these two sources, something else kind of struck me. They both seem to be working within this framework of, really traditional gender roles.
You're right, they do, which is something important to point out, because it's not like that's the only way to approach relationships. It might be their experience, but it's not everyone's.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
What about all the couples out there who are, rewriting the rules completely, challenging those old gender roles, and figuring out what works for them, even if it doesn't fit neatly into these, predefined boxes?
Right. I mean, relationships are so much more diverse and complex than any one narrative can capture.
For sure.
And honestly, I find those couples who are willing to challenge the status quo so inspiring. They're proof that there's no one right way to do relationships.
Totally. And it's like, we can either get stuck in this cycle of blaming each other because things aren't how we think they should be,
right.
Or we can try to approach relationships with a little more curiosity and openness. What if instead of trying to change each other, we actually tried to understand each other?
Right. And what if instead of focusing on all the things that we think make someone valuable, we started appreciating each other for who we really are, flaws and all?
It's about seeing each other as human beings, not just some idealized version of a partner.
Exactly.
So we've gone from is a messy apartment a deal breaker, all the way to, self-love and figuring out what you want in the age of Tinder.
It's quite the range.
It is. If these sources were a couple, it would be a pretty complicated relationship.
Oh, for sure. Lots of unpacking to do.
Definitely. But through all of that, if there's one thing that really stands out, it's how important communication is. Or actually, how much of the frustration in both of these perspectives really boils down to not communicating.
It's so true. Like, you get the sense that they both want to be understood, but instead of just talking to each other directly, they're
Right.
like sending out these coded messages, hoping the other person will somehow just get it.
It's like trying to read someone's mind. And I don't know about you, but I'm not very good at that.
Yeah, let's just say mind reading is not my forte either.
Right. And it seems so obvious, but I guess in the heat of the moment, it's easy to forget that your partner can't actually read your thoughts.
It's so much easier to just assume they should know how we feel or what we want, but that's how misunderstandings happen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how do we get better at this whole communication thing? Because it's obviously important, but it's also really hard sometimes.
Well, for starters, we have to be willing to have those tough conversations. You know, the ones where we actually talk about our needs and expectations, even if it feels a little awkward or uncomfortable at first.
Because sweeping things under the rug doesn't usually work out too well in the long run, does it?
Nope, not usually. It might feel easier in the moment, but eventually all that unsaid stuff is going to come out one way or another.
True. And it's not like we only need to communicate at the beginning of a relationship either, right?
Exactly. It's an ongoing process. Because like we were saying before, people change. Our needs evolve. Our priorities shift.
What happens?
Exactly. So we can't just assume that what worked for us and our partner 5 years ago is still going to work today.
So it's like we have to keep checking in with each other, making sure we're both still on the same page.
Right. And being open to the fact that the page might need to be rewritten every now and then.
So instead of trying to find that perfect person who just instinctively gets us,
Right.
maybe it's more about finding someone who's willing to put in the work.
Yeah.
Someone who's willing to have those hard conversations and, grow and change with us along the way.
Now you're talking. It's about finding someone who sees those conversations not as a chore, but as an opportunity to deepen the connection, to understand each other on a deeper level.
And that takes a lot more effort than just, hoping our partner can magically read our minds.
It does. But honestly, the rewards of putting in that effort, they're so worth it. Because when you have that level of open and honest communication with someone, it creates a foundation of trust and intimacy that can weather any storm.
That's beautifully said. So maybe it's not about checking off boxes on a list, but about finding someone who's willing to co-author the story of your relationship with you. Someone who's in it for the long haul, through all the ups and downs.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe that story won't always go exactly according to plan.
There will be plot twists.
For sure. But if you're both committed to the process, to growing together and supporting each other, then even the most unexpected detours can lead to some pretty amazing destinations.
And on that note, we'll leave you with this. What does your ideal relationship story look like? What are those non-negotiable values for you? And what are you open to redefining as you go? Something to think about, both on your own and with your partner. Until next time, keep diving deep.